Your hallway is such a mess, as always." That was the first thing she said. Not hello, not good morning, just that. The door wasn't even fully shut behind her when she said it. It was 8:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was barefoot on my own hardwood floors, and Diane Callahan was already standing in the middle of my entryway like she owned the place. Because in her mind, I think she genuinely believed she did. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a dramatic person. I don't do confrontation for sport. I'm a freelance interior designer living in a suburb outside Austin, Texas. And most days, my biggest drama is whether a client wants greige or warm white for their kitchen cabinets. I drive a dusty Subaru, I drink too much coffee, and I love my son Liam and my husband Ethan more than I have words for. I am not the woman who picks fights, but I am absolutely the woman who finishes them. So let me take you back, not to that Tuesday morning, but to before it, to when things still felt like they could be managed, when I thought the tension was just an adjustment period, when I still believed that Diane Callahan's particular brand of suffocating love was something we could all navigate around like a slow-moving truck on a Texas highway. I want you to understand what I was working with, and I want you to understand how long I tried to be reasonable before I stopped. Ethan and I had been married for 3 years when this story really starts. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood just southwest of Austin, one of those newer developments where all the streets are named after trees and everybody has a Ring doorbell and a subscription to H-E-B curbside. It's the kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and the HOA sends passive-aggressive emails about trash bins. I loved it immediately. We had Liam when I was 28, and by the time he was almost 2, I had built a life I was genuinely proud of. I designed beautiful spaces for people during the day, picked up Liam from his toddler program in the afternoons, and made dinner most nights while Ethan told me about his day in the comfortably ordinary way that married people do. It wasn't glamorous. It was exactly what I wanted. Ethan is a good man. I want to be clear about that because this story is going to make him look weak in places, and that's not entirely fair. He grew up with Diane as his mother, and that kind of thing leaves a particular groove in a person. He loved her, fiercely believed in her good intentions, with an almost religious dedication, and had spent 33 years being the peacekeeper between her and reality. When she said something cutting, he smoothed it over. When she overstepped, he found the charitable interpretation. "That's just Mom," he'd say, with this little shrug that I came to know like a second language. "She means well." I heard that phrase so many times in our marriage that it started to lose all meaning, like a word you say over and over until it sounds like nonsense. Diane started coming around more after Liam was born, which made sense. She lived about 40 minutes away in Round Rock, and a new grandchild is a reasonable excuse for more visits. In the beginning, she was helpful. She'd bring casseroles in glass dishes with little handwritten labels. She'd fold laundry while I nursed. She'd sit with Liam so I could shower without a symphony of crying in the background. I was postpartum and exhausted, and honestly, grateful. I told Ethan more than once that I thought we'd gotten lucky in the mother-in-law department. I actually said that. I cringe now thinking about it. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single comment. Thank you. The key happened when Liam was about 4 months old. Ethan was at work. I was half asleep on the couch with Liam on my chest, and Diane just let herself in the front door. She said she'd knocked, and maybe she had. Later, when I mentioned it to Ethan, he said I gave her a key a while back in case of emergency. I remember the ceiling of my living room very clearly at that moment because I stared at it for a long time. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked. He looked genuinely surprised that it was a question. "I mean, she's my mom," he said. I let it go. I was 4 months postpartum, and I didn't have the bandwidth. That was my first mistake. The visits became more frequent over the following months. Tuesdays and sometimes Thursdays, usually mid-morning, usually unannounced. She'd text Ethan that she was coming, which meant he knew, and I often didn't until I heard the door. I started noticing small things. A coffee mug moved from the left cabinet to the right. A stack of Liam's onesies refolded in a way that wasn't mine. A throw blanket draped differently than I'd left it. Once, I came downstairs after a shower to find that she'd rearranged the spice rack alphabetically. I stood there staring at it, feeling something I couldn't quite name yet. Not anger exactly. More like the feeling you get when you walk into a room and something's off, and then you realize someone moved the furniture 2 inches to the left. Everything looks the same, but it's not your room anymore. Then came the photos. One Thursday morning in July, the kind of Austin July that feels like standing inside a mouth, I came into the kitchen and found her photographing the sink. She had her phone up, pointed at a stack of breakfast dishes I hadn't gotten to yet. "What are you doing?" I asked, and she jumped slightly and smiled the way people smile when they've been caught but want to reframe it. "Oh, I was just going to send Ethan a cute picture of Liam's little cereal bowl," she said, lowering the phone. But Liam wasn't in the frame. It was just the dishes. I mentioned it to Ethan that evening, carefully, because I was still in the phase where I couched everything. "Hey, it was kind of weird today. Your mom seemed to be taking photos of the kitchen." He looked up from his phone, brow furrowed. "She probably just thought something was cute," he said. "She's always sending me random pictures." He went back to his phone. I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and felt the particular loneliness of not being believed about something small. About 2 weeks later, Ethan came home from work looking like he was carrying something he didn't want to put down. He sat on the edge of the bed while I was changing Liam and said in a carefully neutral voice, "Mom says you've seemed kind of off lately." I stopped. "Off?" I said. "What does that mean?" He shifted. "She's just worried. She thinks maybe you're having a hard time keeping up with things." I asked him to show me his phone, and after a pause, he handed it to me, and I scrolled up through a week's worth of messages from Diane. Photographs with captions. A picture of the entry table with shoes kicked underneath it. "Avery seems overwhelmed." A picture of the kitchen counter with a cutting board and some mail. "Not sure she's managing well." A picture of the bathroom counter with my makeup out. "This has been like this since Tuesday. Just concerned." I put the phone down on the mattress very slowly. "She's been documenting my house," I said. Ethan didn't say anything right away. "Look, she's coming from a place of—" "Don't," I said. "Don't say she means well. Not right now." He didn't. That was the first night I didn't sleep. The Sunday dinner was about a month later at Diane's house in Round Rock, a house that smelled like fabric softener and something floral I'd never been able to identify. There were 4 of us, Diane, Ethan, me, and Liam in his high chair. And about 3 minutes into the appetizers, I could feel something off in the air, that particular stillness, before Diane said something that would sit in a room long after the conversation moved on. She'd made chicken piccata, and there was sweet tea on the table, and everything looked lovely, and I kept waiting. She brought it up in that particular way people do when they've planned what they want to say, but want it to look spontaneous. She excused herself for a moment and came back from the kitchen with a manila folder, which she set beside her plate as casually as if it were a napkin. I looked at it. Ethan looked at it. She cut into her chicken. "I've just been thinking," she said, not looking at me, "about how hard this season has been, for all of us. Adjusting to a new baby, working from home," she glanced at me, "managing the house on top of everything." I kept my face very still. "I think you're doing your best," she said, and the way she said it made "your best" sound like a generous concession. She opened the folder. Inside were printed photographs, the same ones she'd sent Ethan, and more. A dozen at least in plastic sheet protectors organized like a presentation. I felt the blood drain from my face and then rush back. "Mom," Ethan said, and his voice had a warning in it I hadn't heard from him before. "I'm not attacking anyone," Diane said quickly, hands up, still in that carefully reasonable register. "I'm just saying that sometimes, when we love someone, we have to be honest. Sometimes love means stepping in when a mother can't cope." The words landed in the middle of the table like something dropped from a height. When a mother can't cope. I looked at my son in his high chair, banana in his fist, completely oblivious, and something in me went very cold and very quiet. I excused myself to the bathroom. I ran the water so nobody could hear me breathing. I stood with my hands on the edge of the sink and looked at my own face in the mirror for about 30 seconds and had a conversation with myself that didn't have any words, just a decision. I dried my hands, I walked back out, I ate the rest of the chicken piccata, I smiled at appropriate moments. I buckled Liam into his car seat at the end of the night and drove home without saying a single thing, because I'd realized, standing in that bathroom, that I needed to stop talking and start doing. The drive back was 40 minutes, and Ethan talked most of the way, carefully hedging, trying to find the interpretation that let everyone be reasonable. "I think she just gets worried," he said. "She's not trying to make you look bad." I watched the highway lights streak past. "She brought a folder, Ethan," I said. He was quiet a moment. That was a lot," he admitted. "But she loves Liam, you know." "I know," I said, and I turned on the radio and we drove the rest of the way in a loaded silence that was carrying more than either of us wanted to name. That night, after Liam was down and Ethan had fallen asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that went cold over the next 2 hours, and I made a list. I'm a designer by training, which means I think in systems and problems and solutions. And I was done processing emotionally and ready to be practical. I wrote down what I knew and what I needed: the key, the photos, the folder, the phrase, when a mother can't cope. And I looked at all of it on a legal pad and saw very clearly what was being built. It wasn't concern, it was a case. Outside, the Texas night was loud with cicadas, that relentless August hum that feels like the heat has a sound. I listened to it, and when I was done thinking, I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, I ordered a Ring camera, one for the front door, one for the back. The smart lock came 2 days later. I had it installed on a Wednesday afternoon while Ethan was at work and Liam was napping. The technician walked me through the app, different codes, time-restricted access, full log of every unlock. After he left, I opened the access permissions and removed Diane's code, which Ethan had evidently set up without mentioning it to me. I sat with my thumb over the confirmation button for about 4 seconds, then pressed it. Something in my chest unclenched. I texted Diane that evening, breezy and warm. "Hi, Diane. Would love to have you over for coffee Thursday morning. Say 9 a.m.? Would be so nice to catch up. Just the two of us." She replied within minutes. "Oh, that would be wonderful, sweetheart. I'll bring muffins." I put my phone face down on the counter and allowed myself one very small smile. I prepared carefully. I printed the Ring camera footage, 16 visits over 3 months, each time-stamped, 12 of which I hadn't known about in advance, 4 of which occurred when neither Ethan nor I were home. I printed Liam's pediatric wellness visit notes from his last 3 checkups. Thriving, healthy, meeting all milestones, clearly, securely attached. I had a letter from my postpartum counselor documenting in clinical and quite clear language that I was managing well. I put everything in a manila folder and set it in the center of my kitchen table, and I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. Thursday morning arrived with that particular quality of light that Austin gets in early September. Still warm, the sun coming through the windows at an angle that turned everything gold. Liam was at his toddler program until noon. I had coffee made by 8:30. At 9:02, I heard Diane's Lexus on the driveway. I watched on the Ring app as she walked up to the front door and paused at the keypad. I could see the slight tilt of her head as she punched in what I assumed was her old code. Nothing happened. She tried again. Nothing. She stood there for a moment, and I could see the recalibration happening. She shifted her purse strap, straightened slightly, schooled her expression. Then she rang the doorbell. I waited 5 full seconds before I went to the door. I opened it with a warm, completely genuine-looking smile. "Diane, come in, come in. The muffins smell amazing." She kissed my cheek and came inside, and her eyes did their usual quick scan of the entry. Shoes on the rack, table clear, a little vase with fresh flowers. I watched her process that. "You look great," she said, which is what people say when they expected worse. "Thank you," I said cheerfully. "Coffee's ready." We sat at the kitchen table and talked about Liam for a while. His new words, his favorite book. Diane was warm and funny and genuinely adored her grandson. And for about 6 minutes, it was almost pleasant. Then I reached to the side counter, picked up the manila folder, and set it on the table between us in one clean motion. She looked at it, then at me. "What's this?" she asked, her voice careful. "Just some things I wanted us to go through together," I said, and opened the cover. The first page was the ring footage log. 16 visits, each time-stamped, each entry, method noted. I watched her eyes move down the list. "These are the visits you've made to our home," I said. "This column shows whether I knew you were coming." She set down her coffee mug. "Avery," she started, but I turned the page. "These are Liam's pediatric records. I thought it might be useful to have them handy since there's been some concern expressed about how he's being looked after." I said it very pleasantly. Her face had shifted into something harder. I turned the page again. "And this is a letter from my therapist. She documents formally how I'm doing." I smoothed the edge of the paper. Spoiler, pretty well. "You had a therapist send you a letter?" Diane said, trying to make it sound peculiar. "I did," I said simply. She sat back, adjusted her blouse. "I've only ever wanted to help," she said, her voice quieter, more aggrieved. "Everything I've done has been out of love for that little boy, and for Ethan. You've made me out to be some kind of intruder in my own son's home." I didn't say anything. I let the silence be what it was. Then I picked up the remote and turned on the TV, which was connected to the Ring camera app. The footage began to play, a clip from 3 weeks prior. In it, Diane walked up to the front door, used the keypad, entered, and walked straight to the kitchen, where she opened the refrigerator and stood looking at it with an expression that was flat and focused and assessing in a way I'd never seen on her face before. She was in the house for 14 minutes. Both Ethan and I had been out. That was on a day when Ethan was at work and Liam was at his program, I said, and I was at a client meeting in Westlake. The silence in the kitchen had a different quality now. Diane's hands were very still on the table. "You recorded me," she said low and almost theatrical. "In my own family's house. In my house," I said, "with a camera that's clearly visible above the door, which you walked past on the way in." She opened her mouth, closed it. The muffins were untouched between us. I heard the front door then, the beep of Ethan's code, his footsteps, the slight pause as he took in the energy of the room. He came into the kitchen and looked at the television screen, still paused on a frame of his mother standing in our kitchen, then looked at the folder, then at Diane, then at me. Nobody said anything for a moment. "I came home for lunch," he said carefully. "Sit down," I said, not unkindly. He sat. I reached to the bottom of the folder and took out the last page, slowly set it on top of the pile, and slid it toward the center of the table. It was a printout of an email draft. Subject line, custody consultation, concerns regarding daughter-in-law, addressed to a family attorney. The body began, "I am the paternal grandmother of a toddler, and I have significant concerns about the home environment being provided by his mother." I had found it in a screenshot Ethan's sister had sent him weeks ago, which Ethan had forwarded to me at 11 at night with the text, "I don't even know what to do with this." The table was very quiet. Ethan stared at the paper. Diane's jaw was set. "Where did you get that?" she said. Not a question. "It doesn't matter where I got it," I said. My voice was calm in a way that surprised even me, that still cold kind of calm that comes from being past fear. "What matters is that I have it, and that you wrote it, and that it's sitting on my kitchen table." "Mom," Ethan said. His voice was strange, something broken open in it. "What is this?" Diane turned to him quickly. "Ethan, sweetheart, I was protecting you. I was protecting Liam. Someone had to be paying attention." "To what?" he said. "To the dishes? The shoes by the door?" He picked up the printout. "You were going to consult a family attorney. About Avery." He looked at her in a way I'd never seen him look at her. "You were going to try to take my son away from his mother?" He set the paper down and pressed both hands flat on the table. "Mom, I was exploring options, she said quickly. It wasn't definitive, it was just a consultation. It has a subject line, I said. She turned to look at me, and for a moment, her mask slipped entirely. And what I saw underneath was not malicious exactly. It was something more complicated. A woman who genuinely believed she was right, who had constructed an entire reality in which she was the only adult in the room, in which I was the obstacle between her son and the family she'd envisioned, and who had been so certain of that reality for so long that she'd started taking steps to formalize it. That was frightening in a way that pure malice wouldn't have been. I let her look at me. I didn't look away. After several minutes of Ethan talking to her in a low, tight voice and Diane responding in the aggrieved tone she defaulted to when cornered, I stood and went to the counter and came back with one more piece of paper. I set it in front of Diane without ceremony. "This is a formal trespass notice," I said. "My name is on the deed to this house. Your code no longer works. You are not to enter this property without my explicit prior invitation. If you do, I'll be filing for a harassment charge." I said it with the same tone I'd use explaining a design choice to a client. Informative, pleasant, completely final. Diane looked at the paper. She looked at Ethan. "You've turned my son against me," she said, her voice barely controlled. "Everything I did was for this family, and you've twisted it, and you've turned him against me. And now you're handing me a legal notice in my own grandchild's home?" "It's not your home," I said. She stood, gathered her purse, picked up the muffins, which I thought was actually a little funny in a grim way, and walked toward the front door. At the threshold, she turned back and looked at Ethan. Something in her face was waiting for him to stop her, to say the thing that would undo all of this, to shrug and say, "That's just Mom," one more time. He didn't. "Mom," he said quietly, "you went too far." Her face went through several things in quick succession. Then she looked at me. "You've taken everything from me," she said. I looked at her steadily. "No," I said, "you did that yourself." The door closed. The smart lock clicked. In the sudden silence of my kitchen, I could hear the mockingbird in the backyard live oak and the hum of the refrigerator and Ethan's slow exhale from the table behind me. I stood at the door for a moment, then turned around and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee because the first one had gone cold. I want to be honest about what came after, because it wasn't clean or triumphant the way these moments sometimes are in the retelling. Ethan and I had a long night. A long couple of nights. He grieved, that was the right word for it, sitting with the pieces of his understanding of his mother and trying to figure out what shape they made now. He cried once the first time I'd seen him cry in 3 years of marriage, and I held him and didn't say anything, because sometimes the kindest thing is to not make it mean less than it is. He started therapy on his own, made the appointment himself, and told me about it at dinner, like something he'd decided. Couples counseling came later, harder and more uncomfortable and more useful than I can easily describe. Diane did not come to the house again. She sent a letter about 3 weeks later, 4 handwritten pages addressed only to Ethan. He left it on the kitchen counter where I could read it if I wanted, which I did once. It was the kind of letter that was simultaneously an apology and an argument, that explained all her reasons while technically saying sorry, that asked for a second chance in the same breath it insisted she'd done nothing truly wrong. The relationship between them became something formal and occasional. Holiday calls, a cautious visit at Easter that did not include my house updates about Liam, sent through Ethan. No dramatic scene, just the quiet, definitive shift of a family that has reorganized itself around the truth. My life now is very quiet in the mornings. Austin in fall is finally bearable after the brutality of summer. The light is softer. The air has some give to it. I wake up before Liam most days and make coffee and stand at the kitchen window looking at the backyard, which I'm redesigning. A new pergola, some hill country salvias, a little paved area where Liam can run around. I have plans on the counter that I look at while my coffee brews. Liam says new words every few days. Last week he said stuck when his toy car got wedged under the couch, and I made such a fuss over it that he laughed and said it 6 more times just to hear me do it again. He's healthy and curious, and he trusts the people who love him, which is all I have ever wanted for him. On Thursday mornings when he's at his program, I work from the kitchen table with the windows open, and nobody lets themselves in. I notice the silence of that in a way I didn't used to, not as an absence, but as something that belongs to me. There's a drawer in the kitchen, the one where we keep the batteries and the spare light bulbs and miscellaneous things that don't fit anywhere else. In the back of that drawer, behind the tape measure and a tangle of charging cables, there is a key on a round silver key ring. Not the key Diane had. That one is gone, along with the access code